Today I want to talk about a couple of pretty significant trades that almost happened during this offseason. We had one between the Leafs and Blue Jackets that was close, and we also almost had a blockbuster deal for Patrik Laine. We'll discuss what almost happened coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today we're going to take a look at a couple of pretty significant trades that came really close, but not quite, to happening here during the current 2020 NHL offseason. Now, it's been a very busy offseason. After the Stanley Cup was awarded, we had a lot of trades, a big flurry of activity, a lot of free agent signings. It's been a little bit quieter here as of late, but there were still lots of talks, lots of negotiations happening, and I still think sometime here in the next little while we will have more activity because there's a lot of players out there still that remain unsigned. We have teams that have to become cap compliant, RFAs, UFAs. There's a lot of business that's not taken care of. So at some point things will pick up here. It's just a matter of time. However, we did have a couple of pretty significant trades that came really close to happening, but unfortunately fell a little bit short. And I wanted to discuss that with you here today now that we know a little bit more about some of the talks that were going on here in recent weeks after the Stanley Cup was awarded. Now, one trade that was pretty significant being discussed was between the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, at one point, we had discussed the possibility that the Leafs might be targeting David Savard as an option on the blue line. Of course, we know they were revamping the blue line. We knew that Tyson Beer and Cody Ceci were going to depart via free agency, and that they were going to be looking for a couple of new right-shot defensemen. I mean, they did have some options within their own internal system that they could look at. We knew they signed Mikko Lehtinen from Europe, which is obviously, it looks like he's going to be a really solid option the way he's playing so far to start the season over there. Once the NHL season gets underway and he comes over, it'll be really interesting to see what kind of impact he can have. But either way, we knew the Leafs were going to make at least, probably one or two trades. They might go through free agency. We didn't know exactly how they were going to do it. There's a lot of names thrown around, but David Savard is one of them. Now, apparently the discussions that were being held between the Leafs and the Jackets were to send forward and center ice but Alex Kerfoot to the Jackets in exchange for David Savard. Now, of course, Savard is a veteran defenseman, kind of goes underrated a little bit. Right shot defenseman, can play in a variety of situations. Really overall would be a good option. It would have been, a pretty decent player for them to really strongly consider here, which obviously they were. I mean, obviously we've seen them go down the road of making some other different moves, and clearly, with what they've done here, obviously the Leafs aren't likely going to revisit this, and the Jackets likely wouldn't either, because they ended up trading Ryan Murray. They were looking to clear some cap space, which is going to lead them to possibly try to get into the next trade we're going to talk about here. But we've seen the Jackets really trying to move out some money and position themselves for a bigger move later into the offseason, which was something that they were really going to happen. We didn't know if it was going to be a free agent signing or a trade. But either way, we knew that GM Jarmo Kekalainen was busy and had something cooking here up his sleeve. Now, the main reason this trade never fell through was that the Maple Leafs wanted the Jackets to include something else besides David Savard. They felt with Savard only having 1 year left on his contract that the Jackets were getting more value than they were. Obviously, Kerfoot's got a 3-year deal. Obviously, he can be a number 2, number 3 center, depending on what team he's on. Obviously, center icemen do tend to hold pretty good value. Of course, he's a right-shot defenseman on the other side, Savard, so they tend to have a lot of value as well. But obviously, because of the contract differences, the Leafs were like, obviously, we need something more. You're going to get Kerfoot for 3 years. We might only get David Savard for 1. So they wanted him to throw in some kind of a future asset. It wasn't quite clear. We could have been talking an additional draft pick, maybe a prospect. I'm not sure exactly what they wanted, but either way, they wanted something additional. And Jarmo Kekalainen wanted that 1-for-1 deal, and obviously he wouldn't budge on that. So Dubas decided not to go ahead and pull the trigger. Now, of course, we've seen the Maple Leafs make some other moves here on the blue line. Their blue line will not include David Savard. They will still have Alex Kerfoot in their system. But the other moves that the Leafs have made, though, at the forward position, it's debatable now if Kerfoot is going to play center or if he'll end up playing a wing. But either way, he does have longer-term potential at center ice, because, even a lot of the other players that they brought in, like a Joe Thornton, they re-signed Jason Spezza, who can play center, both those guys, but they're only under contract for a year, likely won't be around too long, so Kerfoot could still possibly be a number 3 center for them down the road, and it makes sense for them to hang on to them. I said all along, I thought between Kapanen, Johnsson, and Kerfoot, which were the main 3 players being discussed as trade bait heading into the offseason, that Kerfoot likely would be the least amongst the 3 to be traded. The other 2 would go first, because of the fact that he can play center, so therefore does have a little bit more value. Obviously, we know that the Toronto Maple Leafs went out and signed TJ Brodie. They signed Zach Bogosian. As I mentioned, they brought in Mikko Lehtinen. So clearly, this is not likely going to be a move they're going to revisit. I wouldn't completely rule out the fact that they could trade Kerfoot, but obviously trading for another defenseman that plays the right side right now at least does not make sense. And from Columbus's perspective as well, like I said, they already traded Ryan Murray. I don't think both of them were likely going to go. I think Kekalainen was exploring options to trade either Savard or Murray. Once Murray was traded, I don't think we're going to see any additional changes there. Debatable whether or not Savard re-signs in Columbus or not. I guess it depends on how they see him longer term. Obviously, if they were willing to consider trading him, then clearly they may not re-sign. Difficult to say. But either way, it's a deal that came close, would have been interesting. And obviously, like I said, it was kind of positioning the Jackets to make another move. Obviously, in this scenario, the Jackets wouldn't have saved a whole lot of cap space. They saved a little bit more cap space the other way by trading Ryan Murray, because the return package was very different. Now, the Jackets also traded for Max Domi as well, so that kind of adds another player who can play center after that trade here with the Montreal Canadiens and Josh Anderson going the other way. So, obviously, some other dynamics kind of take place here, and obviously with the roster changes, things change and no longer become interesting. But obviously, like I said, the Jackets were positioning themselves to make a big, bold move, and that could have been Patrik Laine, who they were also targeting via trade with the Winnipeg Jets. Now, there was several conversations that have taken place between these two teams. As I mentioned before, when it comes to Laine or even some free agents that are out there like a Mike Hoffman, that Taylor Hall was one of the players that they were targeting too. They had a variety of solutions and scenarios in play that they really wanted to nail down one of these big-time players. Same goes for a team like the Nashville Predators. We know they also made a strong effort to clear cap space because they wanted to go big game hunting and really add a top scorer that they so desperately need. Columbus saw that in the playoffs as well. They grinded away a victory over the Maple Leafs, but once they got further into the playoffs, they just couldn't score enough to really keep going, and they need an extra offensive weapon. If they can get a top winger to play with Pierre-Luc Dubois like Patrik Laine, can you imagine? That would really be a major boost for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And if he's young enough, they could sign him to a long-term deal. Obviously Kekalainen's a finished descent, so was Laine, probably a player he's watched quite a bit over the years. So, interesting to say. Now, apparently the offers, though, that Columbus was sending to Winnipeg to try to make this trade happen did not really include a lot of future assets, but it did include some of the pieces that, if you look at Winnipeg's roster, was fairly obvious that they were needing some help with. So, for example, David Savard was also included in those trade talks, and they were also including guys like Boone Jenner and Oliver Bjorkstrand. Now, of course, Jenner plays center ice. Bjorkstrand's a pretty good self-scoring winger, not to the extent that Patrik Laine is, but still, they needed a center ice play, which Jenner can provide. They need a right shot defenseman, which they could get from Savard, and Bjorkstrand can certainly add some extra secondary scoring as well, and either play between lines 2 or 3, depending on exactly where he slots on their depth charts there. But either way, that was just not enough for Kevin Cheveldayoff to really get too far into this and really consider pulling the trigger. They ultimately ended up trading for Paul Stastny, bringing in a center iceman who will likely have a chance to play with Laine. They had a lot of chemistry before. Of course, we know Patrik Laine was much rather hoping to slot on the right side of Mark Scheifele when opening night comes for the 2021 NHL season. And maybe Stastny was brought in as well to not only work with Laine, but if nothing else, Laine will likely have a better season no matter what happens, because he's going to have some stronger players to play with, a stronger center iceman at least, and if he can reunite that chemistry he had with Stastny in the past, maybe at the very least he'll have a stronger season, up his value, and maybe they pull the trigger a little bit later on a trade. But Columbus is going to have to do a little bit better than that if they want to acquire the Finnish sniper in Patrik Laine. I mean, obviously, they're going to need some different players here in the mix. Now, when it comes to the Winnipeg Jets, now they have a center in Stastny, but he may not be there long term. So I'm not sure that Columbus is really going to be able to entice them with a top center. Boone Jenner is not going to get it done. I mean, Jenner at best is going to be a third-line center, and that's not what they need. Clearly, based on the other moves that they've made, I don't see Savard really being too attractive to Winnipeg right now, especially with only being down to 1 year on his contract. They've had enough players come in and leave. They don't need to do that any longer. And they've made some other moves on that blue line right now that, yes, they could use some more depth. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure Savard's really going to be what they're looking for either. So I'm not sure that these two teams are going to be able to hook up again on a Patrik Laine trade. I'm sure Columbus will keep their interest. I'm sure that it would not be surprised to find out that they're going to continue trying to make this big acquisition. I'm sure they'd love to have him. I just don't see them really having a lot of what Winnipeg needs, unless they're going to start including some young assets like Liam Foudy, who could be that speedy number 2 center for Winnipeg for a long time. Of course, they also just drafted Cole Perfetti in the 2020 draft, so they got him coming along as well. But to me, Foudy would be the player that they're probably going to want as that projected longer-term center iceman as well. You throw in Foudy along with Perfetti coming up behind Mark Scheifele here. Suddenly that center ice depth in the Jets organization would look a lot stronger longer term as well. And at that point maybe even Foudy becomes a winger. But I'm sure Columbus doesn't want to part with him, but it's probably going to take something more significant like that. Maybe throw in Gavrikov as a defenseman, a young up-and-coming guy, just signed a longer-term deal, and then maybe you throw in some other picks or something, or maybe Bjorkstrand or something. I don't know exactly, but it's going to take better offer than what we just discussed for Columbus to really stand a chance, and I'm not sure they're really going to want to pony up those assets, as tempting as it might be to bring in the Finnish sniper and have a likely pretty solid 35-40 goal guy on your hands for the next number of years. So those are two pretty significant trades that almost happened this offseason, but did not. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on these trade talks that were taking place. Would you have liked to see them to actually get the deals done? If not, give me your counter offers down in the comments and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.